Have you ever wondered how one of the most fortified cities of antiquity fell in just 7 days? And it wasn't through prolonged siege, catapults, or battering rams. It was through something that seemed absolutely impossible. Stay until the end of this video because I'm going to reveal the secrets behind the fall of Jericho that will leave you speechless. Imagine for a moment, you're standing before double walls 15 meters high, built with gigantic stones that had resisted centuries of invasion attempts. Experienced soldiers patrol the top of the walls. Massive bronze gates seal the entrance. This was Jericho, the fortress considered impregnable in the ancient world. But wait, because the story I'm about to tell defies everything you know about military strategy. In 1400 BC, a nomadic people, fresh from 40 years wandering in the desert, managed to bring down this apparently impenetrable fortress. And the method used was so unusual that it forever changed how we understand the power of faith over brute force. Archaeological discoveries. Did you know that modern archaeologists have found physical evidence that confirms specific details of this biblical battle? But before we dive into these fascinating discoveries, I need to tell you about the context that makes this victory even more impressive. The Israelites had just crossed the Jordan River supernaturally. Imagine a river in flood season, with turbulent waters, simply stopped flowing when the priest's feet touched its waters. All the people crossed on dry ground. If that wasn't extraordinary enough, they were about to face their first great challenge in the Promised Land. The impregnable fortress Jericho wasn't just any city, it was a strategic commercial center, located on one of the most important routes of the ancient world. Its walls were legendary, built in 2 layers, with a space of approximately 3 meters between them. They created a defensive system that had resisted countless attacks over the centuries. The city controlled access to the Jordan Valley and the trade routes that connected Egypt to Mesopotamia. Caravans loaded with spices, precious fabrics, metals, and other luxury goods necessarily passed through Jericho. This made the city not only a strategic military post, but also an extremely prosperous economic center. Jericho's walls were an impressive work of engineering for the time. The outer wall was about 2 meters thick and 6 meters high. The inner wall was even more robust, 4 meters thick and 12 meters high. Between them was a space that served as a weapons depot and patrol area for soldiers. The impossible strategy. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. When the Israelites arrived at Jericho's gates, they didn't set up camp for a traditional siege. They didn't build war machines. They didn't cut off the city's water supply. What they did was something that left Jericho's inhabitants completely perplexed. For 6 consecutive days, the entire Israelite army simply walked around the city walls, once a day, in complete silence. At the front of the procession, 7 priests carried trumpets made from ram's horns. Behind them, other priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object of the Hebrew people. Imagine what went through the minds of Jericho's soldiers. They were accustomed to conventional warfare tactics, sieges, direct attacks, attempts to scale the walls. But this was completely different. It must have been both disconcerting and terrifying. Jericho's inhabitants probably watched from the walls, trying to decipher the Israelites' strategy. Some must have found it ridiculous. Others, especially those who had heard about the miracles in Egypt and the desert, must have felt growing terror with each passing day. And there's a fascinating psychological detail here: the silence. An army marching in complete silence is much more intimidating than war cries or boasting. Silence suggests absolute confidence, total control, a secret strategy that enemies cannot understand. The 7th day now. Here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. On the 7th day, something changed drastically. Instead of making one circuit around the city, the Israelites made 7. And this time they didn't maintain silence. When the priests sounded their trumpets for the 7th time on the 7th day, something happened that defies any conventional military explanation. All the Israelite people let out a war cry that echoed through the valleys around Jericho. And then the impossible happened. The walls that had resisted centuries of attacks simply collapsed, not partially, completely, as if an invisible force had shaken the very foundations of the city. Archaeological evidence. But wait, because the archaeological details of this discovery will surprise you even more. Modern excavations at Tel Es Sultan, the site where ancient Jericho stood, revealed evidence of walls that really collapsed suddenly and catastrophically. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, one of the most respected Middle Eastern specialists, found remains of double walls that had collapsed outward from the city, not inward as would be expected in a conventional attack. This is consistent with the biblical account that the walls fell down flat, creating a ramp that allowed the Israelites to go straight up into the city. Kenyon worked at Jericho between 1952 and 1958, using more advanced archaeological techniques than those available to previous expeditions. Her discoveries completely changed our understanding of the ancient city and provided impressive physical evidence that corroborates the biblical account. But there's more. Kenyon also discovered evidence that the city had been completely burned shortly after the walls fell. Thick layers of ash and charcoal were found throughout the area of the ancient city. And here's the most impressive detail. She found large quantities of carbonized grain in the city's storehouses. Why is this significant? Because in prolonged sieges, food would be the first resources to run out. The fact that there was so much stored grain indicates that the city fell quickly, before supplies were exhausted. Exactly as described in the biblical account of 7 days. The grains found were mainly wheat and barley, carbonized by the intense fire that consumed the city after its fall. The quantity was surprising: tons of cereal that would normally have been consumed in a few weeks of siege. This proves that Jericho didn't suffer a traditional siege, but fell quickly, exactly as the Bible describes. Rahab's story now. There's a specific detail in Jericho's story that demonstrates impressive historical accuracy. The biblical text mentions that only one section of the walls remained standing, the part where Rahab lived, the woman who had helped the Israelite spies. And guess what? Archaeological excavations actually found a section of the northern walls that remained intact, while the rest of the fortification had completely collapsed. This section was exactly where houses were built against the wall, allowing someone like Rahab to live there. Rahab's story is fascinating in itself. She was a woman who lived in a house built literally in the city wall. When the Israelite spies came to Jericho to scout the land, it was she who hid them and helped them escape. In exchange, she asked for protection for her family when the city was attacked.
The Israelites promised to spare Rahab and her family, asking only that she tie a scarlet cord in her house window as an identification sign. And that's exactly what happened. When the walls collapsed, the section where Rahab's house stood remained standing. Deep lessons. But Jericho's story teaches us something much deeper than just unusual military tactics. It reveals timeless principles about how the impossible can become possible when there's total obedience to a divine strategy, even when that strategy seems absurd from a human perspective. Think about it. Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, could have questioned the orders he received. He could have argued that marching around the walls seemed ineffective. He could have suggested more conventional military methods. But he chose absolute obedience, even when the strategy seemed illogical. Joshua was an experienced military commander. He had been Moses' right-hand man for decades. He knew warfare tactics, had led battles in the desert. For a man with his experience, the order to march silently around a fortified city must have seemed completely counterintuitive. And it wasn't just Joshua. All the Israelite people had to trust in a strategy that defied common sense. 40,000 trained warriors marched in silence around a fortified city, trusting that this apparently passive method would result in victory. Spiritual preparation. The preparation for Jericho began long before they reached its walls. It began when they learned to follow the cloud in the desert. It began when they saw the waters of the Red Sea part. It began when they received manna from heaven day after day. Each experience in the desert prepared them for the moment when they would need to trust in a strategy that seemed completely counterintuitive. In the desert, the Israelites learned that God could make water spring from rocks. They learned that He could make their clothes last 40 years without wearing out. They learned that He could feed a multitude with bread from heaven. Each of these experiences built their faith for the moment when they would need to trust in an apparently impossible military strategy. And there's a powerful practical application here for our lives today. How many times do we face Jerichos in our own journeys? Obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. Walls that have been built over years and seem impenetrable. The symbolism of 7. And here's something that will give you chills: the number 7 appears repeatedly in this story. 7 priests, 7 trumpets, 7 days, 7 circuits on the 7th day. In biblical numerology, the number 7 represents completeness, divine perfection. Jericho's fall happened in God's perfect timing, not a moment before or after. The number 7 was considered sacred in many ancient cultures, but especially in Hebrew tradition. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. The 7th year was sabbatical. The 50th year, 7 times 7 plus 1, was the year of Jubilee. The repetition of 7 at Jericho wasn't coincidence, it was divine design. The role of trumpets in this battle was also fascinating. These weren't ordinary musical instruments. They were made from ram's horns and had specific prophetic significance in Hebrew culture. The sound of the ram's horn, called shofar in Hebrew, was used to announce moments of great spiritual significance. It was blown on the Day of Atonement, to proclaim the year of Jubilee, and in moments of divine victory. When the priests blew the shofars at Jericho, they were proclaiming that this victory belonged to the Lord, not to human strength. Strategic impact. Now, let's talk about the strategic implications of this victory. Jericho's fall wasn't just symbolically important, it was strategically crucial. Jericho controlled one of the main trade routes between the Jordan Valley and the central mountains of Canaan. With Jericho under their control, the Israelites had free access to penetrate the heart of the Promised Land. It was like conquering the key to a door that opened an entire kingdom. Without Jericho's fall, the conquest of Canaan would have been infinitely more difficult, if not impossible. Jericho's location was absolutely critical. Situated in the Jordan Valley, about 8 kilometers north of the Dead Sea, it controlled the main entrance to the central mountains of Palestine. Any army that wanted to conquer the interior of the land first had to pass through Jericho. The deeper meaning. But there's still another level of meaning in this story that's frequently ignored. Jericho represented more than just a fortified city. It symbolized the pagan system that dominated Canaan at that time. Archaeological excavations revealed that Jericho was a center of religious practices that included human sacrifices, especially of children. Evidence was found of babies buried in house foundations, a pagan practice believed to bring protection to the constructions. These practices were common among the Canaanite peoples. They worshipped gods like Moloch and Baal, who supposedly demanded human sacrifices. Babies were burned alive in religious ceremonies. Children were buried in the foundations of important buildings as offerings to the gods. Jericho's destruction, therefore, represented not just a military victory, but a moral purification of the land. It was the beginning of a process that would establish a society based on principles of justice and worship of the true God. Archaeological discoveries in detail. And here's an archaeological discovery that will impress you. Excavations at Jericho revealed that the city had been abandoned abruptly, with valuable objects left behind. This is consistent with the biblical account that inhabitants fled in panic when the walls fell. Jewelry, weapons, household utensils were found, all abandoned hastily. This indicates that the city's fall was so sudden that there was no time for organized evacuation or for inhabitants to save their most valuable belongings. Among the objects found were intact ceramic vessels, jars still full of grain, bronze tools abandoned in the middle of work. It was as if life in the city had stopped instantly, like a photograph frozen in time of the exact moment the walls fell. Precise dating. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Jericho's archaeological discovery is the dating. Using carbon-14 methods and other dating systems, archaeologists determined that the ancient city's destruction happened precisely in the period where the Bible places the Israelite conquest. For decades, some scholars questioned the historicity of Jericho's conquest. But physical evidence continues to emerge, validating the precision of the biblical account in specific details that would be impossible to invent. Carbon-14 dating of the carbonized grains found at Jericho places them between 1400 and 1350 BC, exactly the period traditionally attributed to the Israelite conquest of Canaan. This concordance between archaeological evidence and biblical account is impressive. Other dating techniques, including pottery analysis and site stratigraphy, confirm that Jericho's violent destruction happened at the end of the Bronze Age, precisely when the Bible says the Israelites conquered the city. Modern application. Jericho's story also teaches us about the importance of spiritual preparation before great victories. Before marching around the walls, the Israelites had to circumcise all men born in the desert, celebrate Passover, and go through a process of spiritual purification. Only after this preparation did they receive the strategy to conquer the city. This shows us that some victories require not just action, but adequate preparation of heart and spirit. And there's another powerful lesson here, the importance of unity. For the strategy to work, all the people needed to march together, maintain silence when necessary, and shout at the exact moment. A divided or disobedient army would have compromised the entire operation. Imagine organizing 40,000 people to do anything in perfect synchronization. Now imagine doing it with a strategy that seemed completely illogical. The unity demonstrated by the Israelites at Jericho was extraordinary. Lasting impact. Jericho's fall established a pattern for all subsequent Israelite conquests in Canaan. It showed that with God, conventional methods aren't necessary. The impossible becomes possible when there's faith, obedience, and divine timing. After Jericho, the Israelites conquered Ai, after an initial defeat caused by disobedience, then made an alliance with the Gibeonites, and gradually took control of the entire land. But it all began with the impossible victory at Jericho. There were also lasting spiritual consequences from Jericho's fall. The victory spread terror among all the peoples of Canaan. Kings and entire nations heard about what had happened and were terrified. The reputation of Israel's God spread throughout the region. Decades later, when the Israelites sent spies to scout the land before the conquest, Rahab told them, "We know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the dread of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt." The timeless message. If you've made it this far, it's because you understand that Jericho's story is much more than an ancient military event. It's a timeless manual about how to face apparently impossible obstacles in our own lives. It's about trusting strategies that may seem strange but produce supernatural results. The next time you're facing your own walls of Jericho, whether it's a financial problem that seems impossible to solve, a relationship that needs healing, a dream that seems unattainable, or any other obstacle that seems impenetrable, remember this story. Remember that sometimes victory doesn't come through strength, but through faith. Not through human strategy, but through obedience to divine principles. And always in perfect timing, never before, never after. Jericho's fall continues to echo through the centuries as a testimony that there are no impenetrable fortresses when God is on your side. And that's a truth that can completely transform how you face the challenges of your life today. Do some walls need to fall in your life? Do some obstacles seem impossible to overcome? Jericho's story teaches us that with the right strategy, at the right time, with the right obedience, even the most intimidating fortresses can collapse completely. And who knows? Maybe you're living through your own 40 years in the deserts right now, being prepared for your own Jericho victory. Each difficulty, each test, each experience may be building in you the faith and obedience necessary for your own impossible victory.